means. So maybe reload that. You're going to want to turn off your speaker. People.
Oh, yeah. Does it show?
So you can open a chat over there. Hello to all of you who are joining us online. We're just getting the chat set up.
Okay.
So it's maybe. Okay. Okay, so we will try and monitor the chat the best we can while we're also presenting. And then, yeah, we'll try and either answer the question kind of on the fly if we're able to, and if we're not able to, at the end we'll have time for question and answer. So we're going to go ahead and get the presentation up on the screen for you. And we're using new audio this time. So if you're having any difficulty hearing us, that would be a great thing to pop into the chat so that we can try and make an adjustment now. So then what I'll do, since you're going to start, is I'll just shift the camera over to you so that you're showing.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Away you go.
Sounds good. So welcome, everybody. I'm happy to be with you here this evening. It's our September Functional Forum, and we're excited to talk with you about solutions for ADHD. And in particular, we're really excited to talk with you about assessment and precision that we can have with assessment that allows us to really get a clear picture of what might be going on. So we're going to spend the next hour or so sharing some information about that with you. So this is not. Oh, there we go. All right, so this is a slide that we have in every one of our presentations. We really value the people who have inspired us and influenced us throughout the years in regards to the neurotherapy approaches that we take. And so we always like to give them their due credit at the beginning of our presentations. And so this is just a list of many of the people who have really guided us on our journey of providing neurotherapy. We always get this question, and so we like to start off our presentations by answering it right at the beginning so that people can kind of have that information and set it aside and be able to listen to the rest of the presentation. So is there research on neurotherapy? our just straightforward answer is yes, there is. We could provide you with lists and lists of bibliographies on the research that's done, but we invite you instead to just go to Google Scholar and do some of your own research on it, and you will find that there is plenty of information about the use of neurotherapies to treat lots of different types of mental health challenges as well as peak performance. So tonight our focus is really talking about ADHD and looking at the idea of what we can do to make assessment more precise. ADHD has a lot of challenges that come along with the diagnosis. It's a very complex neurodevelopmental disorder, and so oftentimes it can show up as ADHD and actually be some other kind of issue occurring. When we think about ADHD, we think about kind of the three main areas of dysregulation, if you will. ADHD affects attention. It affects a person's ability to have control of their impulses, and it affects activity levels. But what we find when you start to dig into the research is that there is an estimate of a misdiagnosis that ranges anywhere between 5 and 35%, depending on what studies you're looking at. Many of the things that get diagnosed as ADHD actually are other kinds of comorbid disorders, or sometimes they're not even really ADHD, but rather perhaps anxiety, oftentimes sleep disorders, depression, and other kinds of diagnostic categories that we might come across. So while the research shows that 5 to 35% range of misdiagnosis, what we actually see in our clinic is that usually about 50% of the clients who come into our clinic saying that they have an ADHD diagnosis don't actually show any EEG biomarkers for ADHD. And so we find different types of dysregulation that just manifest in what you might call symptoms that appear to be ADHD, but they are not true ADHD biomarkers. There was a major study that was funded by the National Institute of Mental Health back in 1999 looking at multimodal approaches to treating ADHD. The study was a pretty substantial study, included 579 subjects, which is a pretty robust subject pool. And the subjects ranged at the time in 1999 from age 7 to 9.9 years of age. They have continued to the study and continued to follow those participants over the years. And so you can find a lot of really interesting data about the individuals that were in that study and information about ADHD with them. But some of the things that that study really brought forward for us to consider were the effect of medications on treating ADHD. So what they found is that many stimulant medications were helpful for people who actually had a diagnosis of ADHD, but that help lasted pretty significantly for the first year to year and a half. But then by year 3 or so of taking the medication, its impact had really started to wane, and people were kind of regressing back to many of the symptoms that they had had prior to starting the medication. So there are some challenges in terms of just using medication as a way to approach symptoms as the medication starts to lose its effect as people continue to take it. The study also found that 40% of the control group that did not qualify for an ADHD label in 1999. So they just, when they went through the study, they did not qualify to meet the criteria for ADHD. They were later on diagnosed as ADHD in adolescence. And so part of the question that comes to mind then is, why did that happen? If what we know according to the DSM is that you would have started to show symptoms earlier on in order to have have that diagnosis. And so one of the critiques around this study has suggested that some of what we see with the reason for the diagnosis happening later on has to do with environment. And so those critiques have talked mostly about like external environments, so school environments, environments that where there are peer groups, those sorts of environments. We're going to talk tonight about a different kind of environment that also can play a role in terms of what we might see that might account for some of what starts to appear as ADHD behavior, and that environment is the brain, and we're going to talk about how that can impact. And then one of the other primary bits that came out of that early research study was that although the stimulant medication improved behavior and like the speed of work, so it kind of kept kids on task, it did not really prove any demonstrable improvement in learning, which is ultimately the goal that we have, is for a child to be able to learn. And so what this is indicating is that while the medication was having some impact on behavior, it wasn't really improving the brain's capacity to learn. So that led to a desire to have some really strong assessment techniques for identifying ADHD in populations. So we look at kind of neuropsychological assessment as that added piece that came in. And it was actually, we were starting to get more of those assessments prior to that 1999 study, but it really highlighted the need to continue to improve them. And so there's been a lot of work done on enhancing traditional neuropsychological assessment. And so this screen is just showing you the things that are covered when you do a traditional neuropsych assessment. It's a paper and pencil and or computerized test that allows us to assess for things like processing speed, thinking and reasoning skills, memory skills, IQ testing. But we can also look at doing screenings for depression and anxiety so that we can rule out some of those as either as part of what's going on, or if we find that those kinds of symptoms are endorsed, they can sometimes help to explain some of what we might see in terms of the attention difficulties and other kinds of symptoms that you might see in ADHD. So this traditional assessment is really looking at behavior and performance of individuals and some self-report or reports from other individuals, so collateral folks like parents, school personnel, other caregivers. We are going to talk tonight about this idea that while neuropsychological assessment has great value, the traditional approach to neuropsych assessment is simply not enough to help us really get a solid picture of what might be happening for an individual who's experiencing some of those difficulties with attention, impulsivity, hyperactivity. And so when we look at why, kind of the reasons for why neuropsych assessment, the traditional assessment by itself might not be enough, we can kind of group it into some categories of reasons or arguments about that. So neuropsych testing is really testing behavior. It's really focused on measuring performance, and it does not really address the underlying reasons for the behaviors. That's a biological piece. And so we're going to spend some time tonight really kind of promoting this idea of wanting to understand the underlying biological reasons for why the symptoms occur. Neuropsych assessment also lacks some specificity. It has deficits, but that when they identify the specific deficit, so perhaps like a processing speed deficit or a reasoning deficit, it isn't necessarily linked to ADHD. Now it could be, but it's not, it's not just ADHD. It certainly could be any other of a numerous number of things that could be causing that. So it identifies those deficits. And even though, if we're just taking the deficits and saying, okay, well, these are good pieces of information, it still isn't giving us the root cause of the deficit. And so if you don't have the root cause, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult for you to be able to address treating that particular deficit to create some improvement there. Another kind of argument with the neuropsych assessment is that its impact, there's an impact of kind of compensating when somebody is doing a neuropsych assessment. So when they come in to do the assessment, they are being asked to do all kinds of cognitive tests and tasks. And because they know they are performing, there is a tendency for some pretty sophisticated coping mechanisms to kick in and to compensate. And so when that happens, we don't actually get a very clear picture of what's happening with that individual, because we're seeing less of the impact due to some of those compensatory behaviors. There are also a lot of varying profiles that we see with individuals who are being assessed, and the profiles will show a varying amount of cognitive strengths and weaknesses, and so it doesn't give us, again, that specificity of this is ADHD, and then maybe one of the in addition to the behavioral versus biological, one of the primary arguments that neuropsych assessments aren't enough has to do with the fact that most of the scores are based on group averages and not on individual data. And so they take a person's performance and score it based on a group of performances. And so it really takes out that the individuality of the person that's taking the assessment. And so those are all reasons that we might look at neuropsych assessment and say, maybe there's something more that we need to be looking at. So one of the problems here is that it relies heavily on subjective information. So many of the assessments that are done require subjective information like checklists, interviews from caregivers, parents, school personnel, and also behavioral observations that are made by the individual, either the psychometrist or the neuropsychologist who is doing the actual observing of the behavior while it is happening. And there can be observer error as well, all kinds of research to show bias in terms of being able to report observed behavior. And so all of those may lead to a little less credibility, validity for the assessment. And that can lead to an incomplete picture, and then oftentimes that leads to a misdiagnosis. And the reason misdiagnosis is such a big issue is that when you do not accurately diagnose, you treat what you've diagnosed, and if you've misdiagnosed, then you're mistreating or not providing proper treatment for what is going on with that individual. Now, having talked about kind of where some of the challenges lie with traditional neuropsychological assessment, there's also value in neurocognitive assessments as part of the assessment picture. So what we're really looking at doing is getting a comprehensive picture of the person's cognitive strengths and weaknesses, and neurocognitive assessment can help us do that. It can also help us to establish a baseline of functioning so that when treatment is applied, that baseline can be checked again throughout treatment to see how functioning is improving as treatment continues on. And that can help to determine the effectiveness of the treatment, or the lack of effectiveness of the treatment, and then an indication that some other treatment needs to be put into place. And it can also be, and this is less so probably with ADHD, but it can be used as a really nice monitor for progression of particular kinds of cognitive diseases that might be occurring. So it can have great value, and our whole kind of conversation with you tonight really is about this idea of creating a new sense of a new paradigm in terms of considering assessment. So I want you to imagine for a minute somebody who's going in for a cardiac assessment, right, to check to see how their heart is functioning. So back some time ago, the primary way to do that was to do a stress test. So you'd come in and you get on a bike and you're wired up so that they're monitoring your systems, and you bike and bike and bike, right? And what the stress test was doing was measuring your behavior or your performance on the bike, and using it to monitor for symptoms like chest pain, dizziness, shortness of breath, fatigue. All of those are sort of behavioral experiences that are happening. And then that would be used to make some kind of, draw some kind of conclusion about what might be happening within the heart, right? Nowadays, if you are looking to get a similar kind of test to see about your heart functioning, we just simply do a calcium scan, which allows us to image the organ to see how much calcium is present in the organ, and that can give us a very clear picture without having to guess based on behavior. It gives us a very clear picture of what's happening in the heart. So it's interesting when we think about the field of mental health, and we're talking about ADHD. Mental health is the only field where we don't image the organ that we're working with. So if you think about this, what we do in the field of mental health is we work with the mind and the brain, right? But we don't on a regular basis do an image of the brain. It's just not been part of the protocol. It's not been part of the culture that we have used. We've relied more heavily on things that would be similar to what a stress test for checking heart health would be. And those are our assessments, our inventories, neuropsych assessments, those kinds of things. And so what we're inviting you to consider tonight is to kind of jump on board with us with this idea of a new paradigm, or a paradigm shift that combines neuroimaging with traditional neurocognitive assessment. We see a need for, in order to have precision in the assessment process, for us to be able to understand the underlying brain functioning. So we need to go beyond symptoms and to really look at the functioning of the brain. So we talk about, like in the brain health clinic, we talk about the idea of we don't treat symptoms, we train dysregulation. And the dysregulation is what is that underlying functioning in the brain that may be leading to some of the symptoms that might appear as ADHD. So I'm going to pass this off to Guy now, and he's going to bring you into this new paradigm a little bit more.
All right, let me just make an adjustment here. What do you think, Fran? Is that going to be about right? Nope, not so much.
Oh, sorry.
Bear with
Bigger
me
than
here.
I thought.
Okay, let's see if that gets me in the picture.
There you are.
Sort of. Okay. So just a few things to follow up on your example of the stress test. You know, I think back to my father, who just maybe a month after his stress test had a massive heart attack. And had they had calcium scanning at that point in time, they would have seen that he was in need of a coronary bypass surgery. But unfortunately, technology wasn't around, so they had to do this kind of more behavioral measure, and in his case, it missed it. Now, I certainly have a few friends where the stress test caught it, so is a great thing to have. Behavioral measures are great things to have. They're just, they can't see what they can't see. And that's where imaging comes in so that we can actually look and see what the brain is up to. So on the screen, you'll just see a collection of different types of neuroimaging that we do, independent component, Loretta, power maps, event-related potentials. There's a growing number of tests, measures, metrics, normative databases that we're able to use to compare EEG to. And we're going to walk you through some of that tonight, but not get too much into the weeds of neurophysiology. So this question is, what is a QEEG? So we have a cap. I think there's towards the end, you're going to see a picture of somebody with a cap on. So you've got a cap on your head. You have electrodes that are connected, that are reading electrical activity in the brain. So when neurons fire, they produce electricity. Those sensors read that electricity that's produced by the brain, and then we're able to compare how much electricity is being produced where is it moving to, where is it moving from. Then that electrical activity, we can use a normative database to compare any particular brain that we're working with on compared to an age and gender matched normative database. And I'm happy to say that we're always working to stay at the cutting edge of technology. And we're working with a group who's just brought in a new normative database. So it is a larger database. It is recorded on modern equipment, and it has some categories to it that we've never had access to. So this is a fundamental change in what we're able to do with EEG. Typically what is happening is being compared to a kind of a database of healthy brains. Now we're beginning to create databases that are symptom-based. So we're able to look at anxiety profiles, depression profiles, ADHD profiles, anxiety profiles, and help assess the patterns that are happening in any one brain. Are they more like some of these EEG biomarkers? So the tools are expanding, the sensitivity is expanding. We're going to see a picture in a little bit to show you just how much information can be pulled out of EEG. So here's as an example. So this is done across 3 human subjects where they're looking at the letter in gray and reading EEG the way we talked about. Now here they used AI to analyze the signal to pull out the patterns. But you can see the EEG reconstruction of the letter is remarkably accurate. And we're at a point now with EEG where if you're listening to a song, the AI can tell what song just by reading the EEG. So people have often questioned, is it accurate? Isn't every brain kind of the same? It's just noise. And the answer is no, actually. There's a lot of information in there, but there are distinct patterns. And the technology is getting better and better and better at being able to read those patterns. So we're not just looking at neuronal functioning, we're actually looking at the brain producing information. And again, what that allows us to do is just becoming more and more refined and more powerful for shifting symptoms. So to say some of the things that we look for, we're looking for, frequency. So we talk about delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. So these are our frequency bands. We talk about amplitude. So how much energy, how many neurons are firing at one time in an area. The more neurons, the more electricity. The fewer neurons, the less electricity. So amplitude tells us something. We look at patterns of communication. So the brain is one large integrated network of subnetworks. And so we're able to break out network activity and see what's happening in the different networks of the brain, look at communication patterns from one part of the brain to another part of the brain. Then are those happening in the order in which they're supposed to happen? and at the frequency in which they're supposed to happen. For example, something like dyslexia. Dyslexia is when the information roughly moving through 40 different areas in the brain to produce what we recognize as a word. If any one or two of those areas can be out of sync, and that can produce the symptom that we think of as dyslexia. So if we can get the information moving in the proper order at the proper frequency, we can eliminate that symptom that we call dyslexia. So some of the advantages of this, I mean, clearly what it gives us is objective data. So it's not subjective. We're not looking at behavior. From our standpoint, I think of, the distance between the brain and behavior is like the distance between the Earth and the sun. It's a long ways away from what is happening on the level of neurons to what we see in the world as behavior, and it goes through a lot of layers of change before we see it manifest. This allows us to really look at the level of the neurons and groups of neurons, ensembles of neurons and networks to see what's happening objectively. And then we can use that to create change in the brain. And it's one of the ways that we know that it works is very much the way SpaceX can launch a rocket and get it to land again. Like that's math. And how do we know the math works? Because the rocket takes off and the rocket comes back again. And that tells us that the math was solid. Same thing here. This is all based on math, and the math works all the time. Right? And this is one of the advantages to working with objective data. So we've got 8 EEG profiles for ADHD, and that's one of the reasons when Fran had said earlier that in our clinic we have about a 50% of the time when people come in with a properly assessed diagnosis of ADHD, about 50% of the time, none of the 8 biomarkers are present. They have dysregulation, and the question isn't, are they struggling? Do they have symptoms? It's just, is it an ADHD? And the main reason that matters is, as Fran said, is it going to be treated with medication? Which medication? Is it going to be treated with, behavior modification, CBT? And are those the right changes for how that brain is processing information? We're going to see an example coming up here, but also one of the more common things that we see in our clinic when it isn't ADHD is what's called epileptiform activity. And you don't want to be giving an epileptic brain a stimulant, and you don't necessarily want to be giving that child behavioral strategies if what they really have is epileptiform activity. What we want to do is correct that. So here are some of the patterns. We'll just go through them quickly. We have spindling beta in the frontals, which can be positive. It's actually often considered a sign of intelligence. It's like a lot of EEG. It's where does it happen and when does it happen? And that tells you if it's a functional pattern or a dysfunctional pattern. So too much spindling beta can look like anxiety. It can disrupt frontal lobe activity, executive function, and makes it onto the list of an ADHD profile. We can have excess theta. We're going to look at an example of that coming up. So that's just slow wave activity. So the brain is processing too slow, or that's not even a right way to say it, that areas of the brain are communicating too slowly. So the information is getting lost and not added into the rounds of computation that are happening. And so that brain is losing track of its data. Excess delta, that's also a problem in that it's a slow wave. But it is, delta is a carrier wave to move information across long distances in the brain. So if we have too much information moving, that also can lead to confusion. Information showing up in places that it's not supposed to be. In the middle, we have a mu rhythm, so the 2 kind of red circles. This is a more common pattern than one might think. And what's happening is the brain is kind of deeply involved in an activity in the motor strip. And what that tends to do is what's called frontal lobe disengagement. And so the frontal lobe activity or executive function tends to get turned down. And so the person, most of the time, is having a very pleasant experience. They feel calm, relaxed, at ease, kind of in their happy place. But their cognitive resources are turned down. And then this will look like can look like an inattentive type. We have peak alpha frequency, so a slow peak alpha frequency. So again, the brain's processing speed, and this really is kind of a proxy for processing speed, can be slow, or not just overall slow, it can be varied. And so that the brain is out of sync with itself. We can have an imbalanced theta beta ratio, so the balance between slow wave activity and fast wave activity is off. And that again causes an information processing. Some parts of the brain are moving too fast, other parts are moving too slow, and information isn't getting to where it needs to be. So these are some of the EEG profiles we look for, and add that in with the other kind of behavioral assessments and neurocognitive assessments to help put together this kind of assessment of ADHD, but then adding to it like how one would address something like a person with ADHD with a mu rhythm versus ADHD with a slow peak alpha frequency are going to be completely different, right? From our standpoint, those are completely different ways in which the brain isn't optimized. On the outside, it could look very much the same. So if we're just looking at behavior, we might try and give those two people similar coping mechanisms, supports, strategies, but that's for the behavior. What we can do is help optimize the underlying neural correlates of that behavior and make change at that level. So here again, we see a fuller head map, and you can see circled, there's the mu rhythm, where again, we have these central components in the motor strip that are cross-talking. And then, so much like if you have a classroom and you have two students that are talking to each other and they kind of disturb the whole class, you could think of a mu rhythm in that same way. Two areas that are cross-talking and it's disturbing the whole brain. So here is, this is a family that we worked with, so mom and three daughters, who all had, well, the three daughters all had ADHD diagnosis. They were all struggling with that academically, socially, just generally in their life. The mom had as well through her childhood and adulthood. And I use this as an example of, I mentioned earlier, the epileptiform activity. So all four of them had epileptiform activity. So we can't say seizures because only a neurologist can say the word seizure. But the best way I tried to describe to them and you know, kind of them sharing with me their experience, me saying, here's what it looks like in your EEG, was as your brain is doing computation, right? Predictive processing, it's building in working memory kind of what's happening in your world right now. So let's say a teacher is standing at the board and writing things on the board, writing notes on the board. For these folks, it was like if somebody went up to the board every few seconds and took an eraser and just erased part of what was on the board. And the teacher just kept writing, and then part of it got erased, and they just kept writing, and part of it got erased. That's what would happen when these big explosions of theta activity, this epileptiform activity would happen. Their brain would just kind of go offline for a second and then back again. And sometimes it was, you know, a full second or even more. Usually it's more milliseconds, but they had some pretty profound rounds of this epileptiform activity. And so on the outside, it just appeared, again, like ADHD inattentive type, where they would just check out for a moment. But what was happening was their brain was kind of exploding with this theta activity. And then they would have to reconstruct the moment around them to kind of catch up. And so that's what life was like for them. Always kind of a step behind, trying to catch up, like what just happened in my world? What am I missing? And they, in seeing this information, they did not like the idea of epileptiform activity. They refused the option of having their EEG read by a neurologist and addressing it the way it should be addressed, and continued to go through the standard rounds of treatment with medication, talk therapy, medications for anxiety. And over the years, none of those strategies have worked, and they've all continued to struggle. And from our side, we'd say it's because the underlying neural activity isn't being addressed. So here you can see, and if you look between these, you can see that that's got a little bit of the excess data in it, but you'll see when I go to the next image how much kind of messier that looks. And that's because there's a lot more of those big waves of activity that you see in there. And that's very disruptive to the normal background pattern of the brain. As all of those overlying networks are communicating, then they have these large disruptions to that. And then they have to reassemble the network on the other side of it. So what we do is we take all of that information and we do a comprehensive report, and then that goes into coming up with a treatment plan. And Fran is going to talk with you about what we do with all of that information to turn it into treatment.
Okay, so the goal here obviously is that we want to have kids that look like these kids on the left of your screen, right, that are being successful in life. And in order to do that, you really have to take care of the brain. And so that's what we do in the clinic here. Taking care of your brain includes all kinds of things like being physically active, having adequate sleep, healthy diet, looking after your heart, being heart healthy in that way, but also training your brain. And that's what we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at now, is the different ways that we go about doing that. So we take all of that information, like Guy said, from the QEEG and the ERP that we do. We take all of that analysis information, and if we've done a neurocognitive assessment with them, we include that in there as well. And then we start to look at options that will help the individual address that underlying brain dysfunction that we have identified through the QEEG process. So we have a lot of clients who come to us because they aren't interested in taking medication for the symptoms that they have that appear to be ADHD diagnostically. And so they're seeking some kind of non-pharmaceutical intervention. Oftentimes that's prompted by things like difficult side effects. We all know how stimulant medications can affect appetite, and with kids that can be very problematic. Dissatisfaction with medication in general. Some families or individuals just have a preference to try something non-pharmaceutical before they engage in that process. So these are the things that we offer in the clinic, a way for you to kind of optimize your brain, optimize your life. So we see the little girl with the cap on the red cap on her head. That is an EEG cap. So that's the cap we use both to do the QEEG, but then to do our 19-channel neurofeedback training as well. You see the woman over on the right side with the big black coils on her head, and you can see a red sensor underneath one of the coils. That's neurostimulation, and so we oftentimes will provide that in clinic as well. And then in the middle, you see the two girls with the goggles on. That's audiovisual entrainment, can be a really helpful device for individuals who have symptoms that either are true ADHD or appear to be symptoms like focus, it helps with reading. It's amazing. You can put this on a kid that couldn't read a couple of sentences, and then you put the AVE on and start a protocol, and they can read you the whole paragraph and understand. It can kind of tell you what the paragraph said. So it can be very beneficial. Those can the audiovisual entrainment can also be very good for optimizing sleep, which can play a significant role with attention issues as well. On the left side, the woman with the helmet and the nasal lasers and ear lasers, that's all photobiomodulation that sometimes can be used. And then we have on the right side heart rate variability, so we'll talk with you. And then in the middle there, that the image that just showed up is somebody actually doing neurofeedback. So we're going to take a moment to show you what neurofeedback looks like. And I'm going to play the video for you and kind of walk through, and it's going to actually show neurofeedback. It's also going to show us monitoring the client's autonomic nervous system, so that we can kind of be looking at that as well. That oftentimes plays a role in what's happening with them in terms of their ability to regulate. What neurofeedback can be really good for, specifically in regards to ADHD, is it can improve, we see like there's lots of research that shows improvement in memory, but also in attention and executive functions. So things like planning, organizing, prioritizing, and then it can be very helpful in emotion regulation, which can lead to reduced disruptive behaviors from those individuals, less aggressiveness, less getting up and wandering, less socially inappropriate kinds of behaviors. And then it enhances neuroplasticity, so that's the brain's ability to be able to kind of rewire itself, and neurofeedback can really enhance that and solidify what we do with neurofeedback training. So I'm going to put the video on, and we're going to kind of walk through it a little bit. I think I might have to mute that. There we go. So what you see here is somebody who is wired up here. We've got the EEG cap on. It's it's hooked up to an amplifier that's taking that the electrical signals from this individual's brain and moving them through the amplifier, and basically feeding them into a database. The database guy was talking about, of kind of normative brains, and then comparing the behavior of the client there in real time with that database of more healthy brains. This is just showing you the amplifier. I think we'll quickly move through that piece. And then what you see the client doing is he's sitting there watching his brain play a video game. He doesn't have any real control over the video game. It's literally when the computer notices his brain behaving like the database, then it will tell the computer game to be successful, and basically the flying object goes through the target, flips over, so there's a visual and then an auditory stimulus, and it's that stimuli that are rewarding for the brain. And so the brain is going to as it gets rewarded, continue that behavior. And over many repetitions, the brain learns how to do that behavior, to behave more like that healthy brain in the database on its own. I'm going to move through this just a little bit to show you. So I think I'm going to let it slow down here a bit. So this is what we see on the practitioner side of things. We are reading as the neurofeedback is happening. We can read, be watching their EEG in real time. And so this is what we see here. We've got a screen that's showing us how many metrics of dysregulation there are. This client had a pretty significant number of metrics, and somewhere in the 500 metrics that we were training. And it tells us like how many standard deviations from the norm it is. And basically what we're doing is training down this network so that it will regulate itself. I'm going to move you through here. This gives you a little bit more of a close-up of that. This is EEG in real time. This is the network metrics that I was talking about that are showing the dysregulation. And then this is, you saw a little earlier when I was telling you about neurofeedback, you saw that little blue box that the camera was on. That's an amplifier that we use for monitoring autonomic nervous system. And this is showing us metrics of the this person's autonomic nervous system. And so it can give us a lot of information about what's going on in terms of the autonomic. So when an autonomic nervous system is dysregulated, oftentimes we see people who struggle with anxiety, maybe even panic, but also a lot of cognitive issues that show up as well. And so we can monitor this. We can also train this during a neurofeedback session as well, so that they're getting kind of a very well-rounded approach. The other thing I will say about neurofeedback is that oftentimes, like in between a round of neurofeedback, so we might do an 8-minute round and then we take a little break and do another 8-minute round, we can work with the client as well to kind of help them get better at identifying their state, being able to kind of problem solve any issues that might be getting in the way of their brain getting optimized. And so we can have this really lovely effect of kind of working with the brain, but also kind of pulling the mind into it as well, and skill development. And so this can be kind of where, if we've done a neurocognitive assessment, we might know that there are some certain skill areas that might be able to be pulled into some of this training as we're doing it. So I think the rest is just kind of showing you more of him doing that. So you can see that we're getting a ton of information anytime that we are doing neurofeedback with a client. Then we have transcranial stimulation. So we do primarily do transcranial alternating current stimulation, but we also do some direct current stimulation. You can see that here. That's the little red sensor that you see. It's delivering current to that part of the brain. The big coils are electromagnetic frequency that is being delivered to the brain at the same time as the neurostimulation or the transcranial stimulation is happening. Research has shown transcranial stimulation can be helpful with, in particular with ADHD type of symptoms. So it can improve focus and attention. It can reduce symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity, and can have some more, like there's some research that's shown that it has much longer lasting impact than kind of traditional medication treatment for hyperactivity and impulsivity. It can enhance working memory, and in particular kind of selective attention, which also can be a problem in people who struggle with ADHD type of symptoms. And then improve social communication and emotion regulation that can happen. Most of the research in that area suggests that a combination of the transcranial stim with some like skill-based therapy can be really beneficial for that. This is audiovisual entrainment. So this is like one of my favorite devices that I have ever come across, because I feel like it is it can be used for so many different things, and I feel like every family should have one of these. Audiovisual entrainment is what the name says. It's in training the brain through audio and visual information that is provided. So you see this little boy here with the goggles on. He's getting pulsating light in the goggles, and then the headphones have pulsating sound in it. And they're pulsing at a particular brainwave frequency, or frequencies based on what protocol he has playing in that box that you see him holding on to. That there's a set of 25 or 30 different protocols that are in the audiovisual. They're already pre-programmed in there. They fall into areas like emotion regulation, focus and attention, kind of calm like meditative states, sleep, brain brightening kinds of states of the brain. And so they work fantastic. There's just a plethora of research on ADHD and audiovisual entrainment. It works just tremendously well to improve focus and attention, and to reduce the hyperactivity and impulsivity. It also works really well in emotion and mood regulation, which can be such an important piece of what has to happen with ADHD in order for people to be successful in managing their symptoms. Enhanced cognitive performance, problem-solving skills, better memory, executive functions, those kinds of things. I talked about the reading skills previously. But the thing to pay attention here is that these are those changes that happen, those improvements that happen, are because the brain is being entrained, right? And so it is being trained to move into a particular state, so to speak, and then what's interesting about it, even though it's kind of like a treatment approach, so you know, you use it daily or twice daily, depending on what your preference is and your ability to be able to do that, but if you use it daily over time, the brain just gets a little bit more used to being in particular states, like to being, like with improved attention, to have more of an increased beta wave, right? And it gets used to doing that, and in particular settings can just kind of start to move itself in there a little bit easier. But this is a fantastic device. We have schools that use this in their resource rooms to help kids regulate emotions so that they can go back into the classroom rather than having to go home for the day. So just a really invaluable device. And one of the best things about it, I think, is that it's very non-invasive and it's extremely affordable. This device is a little over $600 total, and it has all of these possible improvements that you can experience. And the other nice thing about this is it's a device that if you buy it for a child in the family, the whole family can use it and benefit from it. So I would say we probably have maybe 50 to 75% of our clients who are doing treatment in clinic are also using an audiovisual entrainment device at home as a way to augment the treatment that we're doing in clinic. But we also see it as a tool to be used to continue the improvements long after a client has stopped coming into the clinic for training. Do you want to talk a little bit about this and photobiomodulation?
Can do.
Yep. Oh, sorry, I forgot about the camera. Let's
see how I did there.
Yep.
Okay. So that was a surprise.
Sorry.
I wasn't expecting to join you again.
Used to you doing this part.
But it is two of my favorite things to talk about, heart rate variability and photobiomodulation. So heart rate variability is the time between beats. Normally we think about heart rate, so my heart beats at 55 beats per minute, and that's what we think about as heart rate. Heart rate variability is the time between beats. And why that matters is it's a window into the function of our autonomic nervous system. So what we want is our heart to be really only beating when we need it to be beating and resting when we need it to be resting. So we don't want our heart beating like a metronome. So again, you wouldn't want to have a heartbeat of 60 beats per minute all the time. So you're just beating every second. You need that variability, and that's a sign, that variability is a sign of our autonomic nervous system finely attuning our physiology to our need. Because it isn't just running our heart. The heart is what we're looking at here, but it is equally running our liver and our kidney and our pancreas and our spleen and our hormones and thermoregulation, all of it is being run by that autonomic nervous system. And so how well our physiology is running has a lot to do with our health, but also our brain function. Because that information from the body, the largest amount of information going into the brain is what's called interoceptive. So information from the body into the brain. And if that information is dysregulated, then the brain is going to become dysregulated. So heart rate variability, a very important tool that we use in the clinic to help regulate the autonomic nervous system and help both ends of it, kind of the central nervous system, the brain, and the autonomic nervous system. And I like to say kind of from the ears down, those two systems coordinated to optimize regulation. And then that's going to lead to things like, better mood, better sleep, better energy, all things that we think of kind of functionally. That those are behaviors we'd want, but they're being run by these systems, and so we try and optimize the system. Photobiomodulation. So basically, how light affects cells. That's what that term means. And in this case, we're generally using a near-infrared light because it penetrates deeper. And if we're particularly talking about the brain, we have to get through the skull. So we need a near-infrared light so we can get the photons into the brain. And there's a long list of benefits. There's at least 35 benefits, and they're all kind of pro-vitality. It's one of the things that I like about all the things that we do. Nothing is kind of disease-based. We don't treat any pathology. We optimize health. So it's a nice side of healthcare to be on. In the case of photobiomodulation, we're decreasing inflammation, we're increasing mitochondrial activity, increasing blood flow. It can do neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, angiogenesis, which basically means to help the body grow more of all of those things. So it's incredibly positive. I just had a client who's maybe 3 years post-stroke, struggles with vocabulary. 2 weeks into using the helmet that you see in the picture there, about 50% improvement in language in 2 weeks. It's absolutely remarkable. Has gone from being barely conversational to fully conversational. His wife kind of joked and said he's super happy because now he can argue with me again. So a very positive change so far. And like I say, we're just 2 weeks into it. So it is a great resource for brain health, kind of regardless of what the concern is. We have these devices that we use here in the clinic during treatments, but also for people can rent or buy for treating at home. Like Fran talked about the audiovisual entrainment, that does do its best work if used daily. So it's really a home device. Same thing for the photobiomodulation. It does its best work if it can be used daily, which practically speaking means an at-home device. So thank you, Fran, for letting me talk about my two favorite things. So if what we've shared with you tonight sounds interesting, we of course would love to have you reach out to us, whether that's questions kind of about your own engagement in this, or people maybe in your life that you think this might apply to. A great way forward is to schedule a consult with us and do kind of a personal deep dive. But here tonight, what I want to do is, we want to take time to answer any questions. So you can post in the chat. There's also a request to kind of call in. So that would allow us to speak to you on video. So at that point, it comes a little bit more like Zoom, where we're all kind of in there together. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. And then we'll move back over here. And then I'm going to adjust the camera again, so you have access to both of us. Let's see, so maybe something like that will do the trick. And then,
Okay. So there's a question, do you need specialized training to use the AVE?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Go for it.
The answer is no, you don't. This is something you could, just buy off the shelf and use. When we rent them or sell them to our clients, we always provide a video, like a how-to video, some other information about it, but then it comes with its own manual that tells you how to turn everything on, and the protocols in it are, there are descriptions for them, so they're pretty self-explanatory in that way. But if we have somebody that is purchasing an AVE from us, we typically are talking with them ahead of time, so we have some sense of what it is that they're wanting to use the AVE for, so that we can give some recommendations about maybe like what category to consider using. But it literally is, here's, you push this button, and you're good to go, and you do not really need any training to be able to choose the protocol.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you all for joining us. Delight. And I know some of you were planning to be here live, and we're hoping, maybe the next functional forum, which, Fran, do you remember the date off the top of your head?
I do not.
So always the first Tuesday of every month. So first Tuesday, and we're doing...
We are doing, I believe that is the one with ADHD, another ADHD one, where we're going to have a guest speaker or speakers, I think, along with us for that one.
Yeah.
Yep.
So although we talked a lot tonight about ADHD, it was really about assessment for it. That next functional forum is going to be much more about working with the behaviors and the symptoms and the challenges that people with ADHD have, and how to address those from a coaching standpoint and then from a neurophysiology standpoint. So it'll be a great nutrient-dense talk. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.